listening to the House by the Video Store podcast.
There's no more room in hell. The dead will walk near.
We have such sights to show you.
I kick ass for the Lord.
Praise God, get away!
Welcome to the House by the Video Store podcast. I'm your host, William, and joining me today will be
Sean
and Derek.
And in this episode, we'll be doing a comparison of the original 1974 Texas Chain Saw Massacre and the 2003 remake, also known as The Increasingly Terrible Decisions of Jessica Biel, or as you know, it's actually called the Texas Chainsaw Massacre,
but it's Texas Chainsaw as one word, right? Or no, chainsaw is one word, not chain space saw is in the original. That's how you know the difference.
It's the only way to tell.
And that, of course, is the movie that started really the trend of Platinum Dunes horror remakes and kind of kicked off that entire trend in the early 2000s.
Yeah, and we may start doing some more like, you know, originals versus remakes. And we thought this would be a good one because, as William pointed out, it was kind of the first one that kicked off the huge boom. It wasn't like the first remake ever, horror remake ever, but it was definitely the one that started it and set a precedent for churning these out.
Yeah, for more like the modern era remakes. Also, I don't really feel like we've ever discussed Texas Chainsaw in like any type of way.
Capacity.
So
I don't think we have.
And it kind of surprised me because, you know, it's so influential. So it's kind of nice to actually get into this one a little bit.
And it's, I mean, it's definitely one of the big franchises. I mean, it's a franchise, but really, out of the original movies, so the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a big hit. At the time, it was the most, I think it was the highest grossing, like, independent film that had been made at that point, which would then later get overtaken by Halloween, and then I think more recently got overtaken by Paranormal Activity, I think. But if you look at the numbers adjusted for inflation, you know, of course, Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre actually had a bigger net dollar value. But the Texas Chainsaw movies, like the first one's loved. The second one really wasn't when it was released, and it's grown more of a cult following over time. And then there was the one that had Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger, where he had like the robotic leg and stuff.
Yeah, and he tried to get his agents to get them to ban the movie and not release it.
Yeah. So it's a franchise that, like, you have the original movie that was great, and then the sequel, I think people come to appreciate it over time, and, you know, it still had Tobe Hooper directing, and it had Dennis Hopper in it. So I think the second one, you know, over time people have appreciated it and enjoyed it, but the ones beyond that weren't that great. And then I think like the reboot or the remake spawned more sequels
than even the original had.
Yeah. And the remake was just like, I don't know.
So we can, so now we can just, before we get to the main event discussing Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we can just go through the things we've been watching recently. For me, I just, you know, was busy this week because I'm in the middle of buying a house and stuff. But, you know, of course, I did watch the two movies. I watched TV, so some stuff that's not really horror relevant. I watched the new premiere of True Detective Season 2. And it was
How you
okay.
feeling on that real quick? Okay.
It was, I think it's a show. I mean, with any show, you know, it's going to take a while to figure out if the season's good or not. The theme song isn't very good. I didn't like the theme song at all, although that really doesn't have any bearing on the show. It's just,
it sets the tone for it. You know, it's the first thing.
It just feels like the first season, you know, had like almost a supernatural twist or an occult type feel to the story that was happening. And it was very well shot and well put together and very compelling. This one, just everybody feels gruff and like an asshole. Mm-hmm. And I think Vince Vaughn was kind of miscast in it, but give it time to see how it works out.
I was hoping I would be wrong about my criticisms on that, you know, because I always give everything the benefit of the doubt, but
yeah. And another show that I watched that's definitely horror related, and I mentioned it before, is Hannibal. And it really sucks because it got announced recently that NBC was canceling the show or not renewing it, and they will thankfully be airing all the episodes that have been shot. But, you know, this was a show when I watched it, I was always just curious as to how that got on TV with the things that happen in that show.
yeah.
And But luckily for the show's sake, NBC canceling it now gives it a better shot at getting picked up and renewed somewhere else, because they still have 10 episodes of the show left to draw interest and drive the conversation, and to get, I think Amazon's the most likely one to pick them up, since they already have the exclusive streaming rights to the show.
Oh, yeah.
So I think the show's showrunner, Brian Fuller, said there's about a 50-50 shot of them getting the show picked up somewhere else. So if you...
It's amazing where TV's at right now, you know,
But
where
this-
it's all those other options. And then I just saw an article that said by 2016, Netflix is going to overtake viewership, you know, have a higher viewership than NBC, Fox, ABC, all the major networks.
Well, they just have so many shows that are interesting. I think too, though, like the streaming platform. To me, like I'm a person that binge watches. Like if you put something on Netflix, I'm gonna binge watch the season. Even if I like, and I think that makes it better because think about it. Would you rather be able to watch an entire season episode in a week, or do you really want to span it 4 or 5 months?
Yeah, I mean it's through the on-demand element, but to their credit, I think NBC, the David Duchovny
Aquarius.
Zodiac,
Yeah.
Aquarius. Didn't they release all those episodes on NBC.com for streaming, so you can binge watch that?
Yeah, on NBC and Hulu, they just dumped all the episodes at once before they aired, just to kind of test the waters on that.
Which is cool that NBC is trying to be a little progressive on that end and experimenting. But I actually watched the first episode of Hannibal. William, did I tell you that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd only had stopped it last week because something happened. So I finally finished it, and I really liked it. I really like for you expect it to be like a typical, which I didn't really expect it because I heard good things about it, but a typical procedural crime show with Hannibal or whatever. But it's got a lot of great horror imagery. Like even if crazy things aren't happening. What is the character's name? The main character, that not Hannibal.
Will Graham.
Will Graham, yeah. He has a lot of visions and everything, so they do a lot of cool visual things that kind of build an atmosphere around it, getting into his mind and stuff like that. So I think visually they can have a lot of fun with the show because it's just not like a straight, just a straight perspective of real world occurrences.
It's not just like a procedural.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to ask you, not to spoil anything, but the first episode wraps up the first crime, or, as far as that's what I saw. I know there's a larger story arc, obviously, but is each episode kind of focused on a different killer, or how does that series pan out for somebody that hasn't watched it?
So, like the first season, it follows kind of the structure that a lot of shows have used before, like Justified or The Shield or stuff like that, where you have the overarching season stories and the things that are the long-term arcs interspersed with kind of like weekly there will be different murders or serial killers they're looking into. And that's kind of how it is for most of the first season and a little bit of the second. But by like the middle of the second, it kind of has abandoned that and just been more focused on the overall story. Even though there's some, one-off killers still sprinkled in. And season 3 so far has been told like there was like a big event that occurred in a prior season, and it's kind of like an out of order telling of events and like purposefully obscuring like certain outcomes from the audience, and until a few episodes in, and the showrunner Brian Fuller, actually the directors that have come on board to do different episodes, he's actually like the direction he gives them is just pretend it's an 80s pretentious art film.
Wow.
And,
yeah.
And some of the imagery on this show is just mind-blowing to me that it's on TV. The stupidest thing, though, was on an episode a few weeks back. There's a scene like where they, stab a guy in the head and like blood squirting out, like all this graphic stuff. And there's like a nightmarish like dead corpse that's all like the legs and arms are all like bent up. It's like very gruesome, this very gruesome scene. And it turns like a deer or something. Like it was scary as shit. But in the same episode, they show a piece of art and they blur out the butts. It's like, are you fucking?
God.
So you're showing a corpse that's been disemboweled and like made into an art exhibit, and then you're gonna blur out the butts on like a piece of art.
I feel
maybe
like
they
I
said
could see part of a nipple in that first episode, like an areola at least. Like I think a horn was blocking it, not to be too spoiler.
Yeah.
And and there's some straight up, going back to Texas Chainsaw, the cannibalism in that movie is kind of implied,
Yeah.
And in this movie, or in the first episode of Hannibal, they kind of make lungs look a little tasty, actually.
Like this show has a lot of food porn in it.
Yeah.
And if you've watched any of the movies, like, so actually I did a video about Manhunter this week. So like Manhunter, Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal, Red Dragon, or God forbid, Hannibal Rising. Like this show actually has more graphic things in it than those movies. Just the stuff they put on screen. So if you're a horror fan, if you like any of those movies, it's definitely worth checking out. And it's not just a standard police procedural that just so happens to have Hannibal in it. And the guy that plays Hannibal, Mads Mikkelsen, he's amazing in the part.
I love the setup in the first episode and how they bring him in and his role, at least in the first episode, like that script for that. If I would be like, absolutely, let's shoot this script. And then seeing that pilot, I'd be like, let's pick this show up. Like it is a standout kind of. It's awesome because it's an interesting premise, but at the same time, it's an established franchise. So it was a great idea, a great script when that thing could have went wrong,
And like I said, I think I mentioned before, like they have a lot of good directors that have came through and done episodes. So Brian Fuller, the showrunner, he also worked on Heroes when it was good, and Pushing Daisies, and I think Showtime show Dead Like Me, or one of those shows. I forgot which one. Because there's a period of time there's like the high concept shows about stuff like that.
Yeah.
And there was a few of them that are out. I think it was that. I don't remember. I wasn't a big fan of that show, but then they've had David Slade, who directed 30 Days of Night, who's been involved in some episodes. Vincenzo Natali, who did Splice and Cube.
Oh, yeah.
And so they've had, good directors. The cast, they have Lawrence Fishburne, Mads Mikkelsen. When you watch the course of the show, like everybody thought, like, oh, Anthony Hopkins is Hannibal Lecter. This version of Hannibal Lecter would fuck up the Anthony Hopkins version and have him for dinner quite easily. So that's definitely worth checking out. Not to drag on for that for too long. Then another thing, actually, that is related to TV and a TV from movie conversion was on YouTube right now. If you go out there prior to the premiere of Scream on June 30th on MTV, they have the first 8 minutes of the first episode posted on YouTube. And I checked that out today. I know there's some sites that already have reviews and stuff, but we don't get screeners of stuff yet. But I watched that, and the most I think the most notable thing about Scream is at least to the general audience, is their openings. Like the first movie, the first Scream, the opening to it, Drew Barrymore, like that was kind of an opening to a horror movie that hadn't been done that way really before.
Yeah.
And it was very meta, and it was very fun and exciting. The opening for this show, like, it wasn't epic, it wasn't meta, it was the fear I have for that show, which like Hannibal didn't do, because Hannibal feels, it's not like a real world, but it's not just all super pretty people and expensive houses with melodrama. And that's what it looks like this is going to be, because it's, extremely pretty people in like a multi-million-dollar house with like this huge ass, like Olympic size in-ground pool.
But no real commentary on that fact.
Yeah.
It's just, that's what it is.
Well,
Yeah.
but in all fairness, so that's also true to the original Scream, because you think about it, like in every one of those movies, they were, with the exception of the second one, because that was more of like a college setting and sorority houses and stuff. But even in the first ones, they always were super rich people where they're in the real big houses. I don't feel like that's a huge departure from the original Scream, because the original cast were pretty people too.
Well, I think a key difference, though, in the first Scream series, the houses were big, but they were still within the realm of, people could be living here that aren't ultra wealthy. Like
These are these more like penthouses, like.
Well, they have like this. So this house had like a huge like glass wall. Like this is a multi-million-dollar house. Like I said, like a huge in-ground pool that has like all these lights in it, and so it's like this. And I've seen like some of the series trailer shows like people walking around Porsches and stuff. So it looks like it's gonna be
hard. It's hard to feel bad for the rich when they get,
yeah, you don't feel
because it's not, it's not relatable to the masses. Really, that's what I mean by that. And as you've brought it before, the great part about some of those horror films are typical suburbs. Like It Follows and Halloween and stuff.
And in this one, so like in Scream, the openings, the biggest part was always the voice changer. It's like, what's your favorite scary movie? So you had like that element, and it's like self-referential to horror and to stuff. And this, there really was none of that. It was just somebody pretending to be like a boyfriend, like sending text messages. So it wasn't even a phone call.
Well,
And
Then again, though, that relates to 2015 youth culture over mid 90s youth culture. Because honestly, I'm 25 and I hate talking on the phone. So I don't feel like that's like a huge shocker, because that makes more sense in today's time than people calling on a landline.
yeah, the fact that there wasn't like any meta commentary on horror or anything, it was just
Well,
kind of generic. I mean,
it's MTV.
from what I've read from some of the other people that have written reviews, this show is not really for fans of the original or for people.
it's for the teenage generation, essentially.
But to me,
Yeah.
though, it's kind of funny that they chose the Scream franchise, because it's like, here you're using a notable name, but you're relaunching it, and it's really going to have nothing to do with the original, and you're not aiming it at the original audience. So it's just kind of odd that you'd even use the original name.
Well, it worked with MTV for Teen Wolf, so
Yeah, and something about when this podcast goes up, I think the Scream TV show will just be airing or have already aired. Probably, I'm sure it already aired by the time you heard this. But they tonight they were airing the Scream movies. We record this on Sunday night. I don't know which ones, but I saw Scream 3 was ending, 4 was coming on, and then there was some other show, and then a bunch of Teen Wolves, and it's like they're really leaning hard on the horror. You know what I mean? On the horror genre. And if you miss Scream, the TV series, when it comes out on Tuesday, Monday they're having like a preview, which I'm assuming is probably that first 8 minutes that's on YouTube. Tuesday they're gonna is when the episode comes out, which is what is that, June 30th?
yeah.
And they're re-airing the episode probably at least twice a day, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, every day except for Friday. It's only airing once. And then next week, when the second episode comes out, they're airing like both of those a whole lot too. So if you miss it, there'll be plenty of opportunities to check it out.
Yeah,
it seems like they're really trying to get this in people's faces.
I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like it'll be something I'm not interested in, but I'm still going to watch it just to make sure.
Oh, I've already recorded it. I've already recorded it.
Like,
but I'm not
like, I know that I'm probably not going to be interested in it, but then again, I also really want to watch it just to see. Because, here's the thing. As much as I honestly don't have a good feeling about that it'll be anything that I'd be interested in watching from week to week. But, granted, we can go back to the couple of the films we've done podcasts on lately, and the theme of it is I thought it wasn't going to be good, and I watched it, and it was, better than I expected, or it was actually good. So, maybe it might possibly be interesting, or fun to watch. But being that's MTV.
Well, and two, something that's odd is Scream 4, I think, at the box office, so I think it was like in the past week or so, somebody at the Weinstein Company said there wouldn't be another Scream movie, that the TV show is the next iteration of Scream.
Killed it. Fuck.
I think that part of it is, and it'll be very interesting to see how next year, how the new Halloween recalibration, Halloween Returns does at the box office, and the new Friday the 13th that's supposed to come out, because they're both coming out in 2016. So it'll be interesting to see how those movies fare. But Scream 4 didn't do very well at the box office when it hit, because the previous movies had all made around $100 million or more in the U.S.
Yeah, but they all hit pretty close together. It was within 3 or 4 years. All three
Scream
of those came
4
out.
had a little bit of a break.
So I think that since then, the slasher has still existed, but I think that the The Conjuring, Insidious, Paranormal Activity, the ghost type movies have kind of become the mainstays of the horror genre, because horror in the box office typically lives and dies by young people, like teenagers, college kids, people who go out to the movies and see them on Friday nights with their friends. I think that's kind of what drives the horror box office. And I think that there's just been a shift away from the traditional slasher film and more to like the ghost story type movies.
You know,
You're absolutely right.
And going back to, you know, when we were watching Insidious 3, a preview of a movie was for The Gallows. And I think that's made, you know, produced by the same company that did Insidious and 2 and 3. And I think they've also done the Paranormal Activity movies, and like that movie. Like, I don't think it looks good. It's something that doesn't interest me, but it might be very successful in the box office. Wise, you know, I think that movies like that. I think that I think what another thing too is, it's just like, you know, a lot of these movies, you know, Halloween interests people in a certain age range. Where like, and I think the Rob Zombie movies too. I don't really know. Like, I've never really got a general consensus of people that like them or not. I kind of feel like people are split from what I talk to, because I know some people absolutely hate him and some people just love him. And I think that kind of maybe hurt that franchise too, because it's like you have two different types of Michael Myers, you know, and
the scary type and the redneck whose mom was a stripper version.
And so like you just have like two different types, and maybe that might hurt this newest one coming out, because your general
it'll confuse people.
Yeah, it'll confuse
that started
people.
out with those.
Yeah, because like that movie, I can't remember when was the second Rob Zombie one, 2010 or something, 11, 2009. So I mean, it's been 6 years, so it's still relevant enough that people might still associate with that.
But,
you know,
yeah, maybe. You know, I don't know. It's hard to gauge and put your mind in the age of teenagers and what they paid attention to.
One, two,
and what's been on TV, like, you know what I mean? Like, where their viewing habits are, Netflix, like it's.
But another thing too, though, I just feel like as much as I love Halloween, like I still feel like the Friday 13th films and the Nightmare on Elm Street films will always appeal to teenagers just a little bit more. And it might have just been too because like I think Halloween 3 kind of. I liked it, but I think it still kind of hurt maybe that film's reputation because, you know, it changed it so much, and a lot of people didn't like it because Michael Myers was in it.
Yeah, I think there's enough distance now from that where.
Yeah. But no, I was saying, like, I just think, like, I don't know, I just think that characters like Jason and Freddy are just a little more fun, you know, because, like, while, like, Michael Myers killed people, like, in the fourth, and he's always so. They kind of ruined the franchise by making him so fixated on one person, you know, whereas like, because if you're not associated with person B, you really don't have to worry about it. Like, he's not just going to come murder you, but if you're just like anywhere around Jason, you're going to die. Yeah. Or Freddy Krueger is like, if you're just a teenager in this area, you're going to die. Whereas like the Halloween movies kind of, I think they fucked up by saying, okay, well, we're just going to make the focus this girl and anybody that's with her. And I think to me that hurts that franchise a little bit.
Well,
and I still think that kind of went on with the Rob Zombie ones too, where it was, you know, they made it more like a family thing too, and it's like, it kind of hurts it because it doesn't really make it that scary because then it's just he's only a threat to this person.
One thing to keep in mind too is just at the box office this year. So I think, in a lot of people's opinion, one of the best horror films of the year so far was It Follows, which we all liked a lot and did a podcast on. And it only ended up making a little bit under $15 million at the box office, which for its budget and the fact, you know, it's like an independent horror film, that was a, you know, pretty decent return. We're very lucky that it got a theatrical run at all, that we all got to see in theaters, because it was originally going to be a video on demand and like a limited release thing. But the movie Unfriended, that was all from the perspective of a laptop screen between like video chats and social media, that made over $30 million. And,
wow.
And that was a movie that actually I've heard the reviews aren't that bad for it. I'll check it out at some point. I just haven't had time. But that's a movie definitely geared towards the social media crowd now, and that made more money.
Yeah, because that's just something people understand more. Like, you know, whereas It Follows, it was a very good movie from front to back. It just sometimes movies like that don't really get recognized as much as an easier movie.
Well, you know, it's like it was more of an abstract.
Yeah,
idea.
it
like
was.
I said, it extrapolated on, you know, kind of the thing Michael Myers stalking. It extrapolated on that where something's always coming after you, but you know, is kind of a metaphor for, you know, sexually transmitted diseases and all these other ideas that they were able to jump off from typical horror genre tropes from, so there was more to it than a typical film. So it may have lost people because they thought it was just, some people I've explained to it, they're like, oh, that's kind of a dumb idea. I'm like, no, it's presented in a really smart way. It's, they're doing it for a reason. They're saying something about it.
I think sometimes too, people feel like maybe this isn't the right word, but it's just like they hear it and it sounds like too smart for them. It's like, well, I don't really want a horror movie that's really like that in depth. But just to think about it, the movie we're about to talk to, the original, my mind is going blank.
Texas
Chainsaw. The original Texas Chainsaw actually had deeper meanings than just a horror movie. You can read about a lot of people that they read into it as like a stand against like the slaughterhouses and blah, 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 blah.
The politics of the time.
Yeah. So it's like sometimes horror movies can make a little bit of a statement while just slaughtering innocent teenagers left and right. Or maybe not innocent teenagers. The
horror genre is, I feel like, for the most part, one step away from the earlier sci-fi genre and not as smart, but it still has subtext. Like, a lot of those sci-fi films and TV shows like The Twilight Zone, they were doing a lot of social commentary at the time, and they were getting by putting that stuff on TV as using stuff as a metaphor or, a way to get this message across. And horror films do that too, but typically it's not as smart or
on accident.
Or
it's
on accident.
Yeah.
They're a level under as far as intelligence usually on that. Not all of them, but broadly speaking, like Star Trek was very progressive in some of its ideals and stuff.
But just like Unfriended was, like I said, I haven't seen it, but it was probably more of just a less thought-provoking, fun horror movie than It Follows. Not having seen it, I'm just purely speculating on that. So it might have been a more fun movie to watch for the general audience.
And it was on a laptop screen.
Yeah, but, that just pertains to people now. Whereas, like, I'm sure that
that's the way we all live our lives now.
Yeah,
on a laptop screen.
So that, like, makes sense to people.
Actually, now it'd be a smartphone screen.
Yeah.
It's just,
laptops are, it's kind of weird thing that laptops are kind of like.
But like I think with horror, what you typically see happen is usually about every 10 years a movie comes out and defines the movies that happen in the genre, because a lot of horror movies are very derivative. Whenever something's popular, they all pop out, knockoffs, clones, or movies in the same vein.
3 on a Meat Hook came out after Texas Chainsaw.
Yeah.
And like you had Scream, then even though they had some of the same writing talent involved, you had like I Know What You Did Last Summer, then you had like Urban Legend and Halloween H2O.
Well, but just look at the original Halloween and look at the stuff that spawned. You like Halloween, My Bloody Valentine, then all your just other various like 80s slashers. You have Friday the 13th.
So 2016, when Halloween and Friday the 13th come out, it'd be interesting to see that as a referendum on where those genres stand.
I would say that Friday the 13th will probably be a little more successful box office wise. But then again, I don't know about that because, like you said, they had that one come out recently and it didn't do that great in the box office, did it?
Well, the 2009 remake made decent money. It was one of the, like, if you don't adjust it for inflation, it was the highest grossing movie in the series aside from Freddy vs. Jason.
Yeah.
It's just it didn't do Paranormal Activity numbers.
No, but Paranormal Activity was like one of those genre redefining horror movies. That movie kind of has set up the way horror movies are done for almost a decade, because I say that the first found footage stuff will probably still go on. Like I said, The Gallows is a movie they're pushing really heavy. I think comes out in the next couple of weeks or so.
And the thing with these franchises, like people latch on the characters, they love them, that's why they do good. But the thing about horror is like the fear of unknown, and that's what excites people when there's something to be afraid of. Well, you see these characters again and again, and you know them, and kind of the rules of their character, and it just becomes less scary over time. I think that's why Nightmare on Elm Street, went goofier. Friday the 13th, it became less scary over time.
Well, I guess
it's just one of those things. So it's for the slasher genre to come back. Like we talked about the article that was like 2016 is going to be the return of the slasher genre. For that to come back, there's going to be to really come back, in a big way and not just make enough money and have to make a huge splash. It's going to have to be a whole new school of people or a different take on it. It Follows had an interesting take, not that it was a slasher, but But who knows if it'll ever be able to come back like the way it was. Like that time may be over.
Well, I think you do have a good point, though. Is like, you can maybe do multiple Friday 13th. The only way I see it working is like Friday 13th's motto: don't have any characters overlap, and just have people get slaughtered like lambs. Just have terrible, ridiculous shit happen to them. But then again, I kind of think that may have run its course.
How much can you watch it? I mean, granted, you can watch it a lot. People love it, but at the same time, it's not going to bring in new people. It's not going to excite people in the same way.
Because it's been done and done and done.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like William said, I think that paranormal angle is the new trend. So
and that too, there's like so little investment in those characters. So it's like going to those movies, like everybody's going to die. You know that going into the movie, that there's going to be nothing left.
So you go in, you're like, okay, I'm already ready to let these people go because this person's probably going to die. This person's going to die. These people will probably be the last two people or last. You know what I mean?
It's like it is. Spoiler alert on the paranormal franchise: everybody dies. With the exception of the one girl that's like the girlfriend, the first one. She's in all of them, I think, from what I've seen.
Well, then there's the terrible Paranormal Activity, the marked ones.
Yeah, I never seen that. That one was.
I turned it on the background on Netflix before, just because, something to put on the background, and I ended up not even paying attention and turning it off because it annoyed me so much.
I just think that like with horror movies, like with the slasher, I think it's more interesting if you don't have sequels. Like if you can, because like I understand like from a monetary standpoint, like they're going to make them, but like for example, we're talking about Texas Chainsaw. Like the first one was so good, it ended where it didn't need a sequel. Like there's nothing in that movie in the way it ended where I was like, man, I got to see what happens next. Like if it never had another one remade, you'd have been perfectly fine with it.
Well, I think too,
I think that the mystery of some things too is more fun because like the longer that these movies goes on, like they have to try to explain more and more stuff. And I think like the more stuff gets explained, the stupider it is and the less likely it is to be like, that's scary. Because like Michael Myers ceased to be scary when a Celtic organization that worshipped stupid shit was controlling him.
And Paul Rudd killed him.
Yeah. And Paul Rudd killed him with like a lead pipe or I don't know, whatever it was. It just lost interest.
I think part of it too is with the kind of the melding of genres that's happened over the years. A lot of the elements of slasher films or a lot of, horror tropes in general have kind of been consumed by the rest of popular culture. Mm-hmm. So something like Jurassic World, which is, blowing the box office up right now. It's on fire. It's making a ton of money. It has horror elements in it. Video games these days, a lot of the most popular video games are, very heavily influenced by horror. So I think you've just had so many elements seep into mainstream that a lot of the general public watches the things that has those elements in them, like Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, versus actually watching horror itself, at least the box office.
Well, like I said, another thing too is like this goes directly back to Texas Chainsaw. It's like in the original, you did not know why Leatherface did what he did. It was never really explained. Like they give little hints, but it was never like he kills people and cuts their face off because of this. Whereas in the remake, it was kind of.
We can save that. So, has anybody else watched anything?
I have not watched anything else.
Yeah, I was going to say one other thing. I think an interesting turn I was thinking today, like something that could be a jumping off point for exploring new horror genres is to mix genres like a lot of great films do. I hear, Ant-Man is supposed to be a heist film. And a shrinking movie, which the shrinking movie was kind of a little thing. And it's, and there are movies that are like that blend those genres sometimes. But a lot of times it's just a straight movie, like, have something off the top of my head, like which there has been plenty of these cross genres, but, like a vampire Western movie or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Like there's room for that. So I think there's some more things to explore and to have fun with, and still keeping it a genre film and not just a blended show with horror elements like Game of Thrones or David Fincher's Zodiac. Like, that's kind of a slasher movie a little bit,
Yeah.
and it's a mystery, but it's one of those things where you can still have a strong genre film if you just blend them the right way and make something original. For me, I watched, not horror related. It has a cult following. I don't know if it's a traditional cult film like we kind of the stuff we cover, but Kiss Kiss Bang Bang,
Yeah.
Shane Black. I watched that finally after years and years when Blu-rays were first coming out. That was like one of the first ones I remember, and HT Digest was like, "This is a great film. It's unseen," and I was like, "I need to get that movie." And I finally got it like 10 years later.
I think I have an HD DVD of it
Oh man!
because I bought a laptop that had an HD DVD drive, and at the time, if you bought one, you got a voucher to get 5 movies, and there were only like 25 movies in total at the time it came out.
Yeah, it was an early Blu-ray or an HD DVD movie too. But I really like Shane Black. I watched Lethal Weapon 2 recently. I like Shane Black a lot, so I was just, I don't know, been on a Shane Black kick. And then I just watched the episode of Hannibal, and I feel like I watched one more thing. Let me make sure. Yeah, I don't remember. Other than that, I watched both Texas Chainsaw Massacres, but I'll definitely be watching some more Hannibal now.
Yeah, it's a show that has a pretty devoted fan base, and it's getting talked about a lot more now that it's been canceled, unfortunately, but there's still time for somebody to pick it up. All right, so I think we can move into our discussion of the Texas Chainsaw movies, the 1974 original versus the 2003 version. And just one thing that I've seen people talk about before is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original at least, a slasher film? Because when people talk about slashers that really reinvigorated the genre and kind of made it a household name, most people talk about Halloween as the jumping off point, and then the Friday the 13th movies and all the stuff that followed, and reference that. Psycho was like a slasher thriller movie, but people typically don't include the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in that discussion. I mean, I think it is a slasher, but I think it's a very specific. I think it's almost its own genre.
Yeah,
because there's so many movies. Like House of a Thousand Corpses is an even more redneck version of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Well, the one thing though is like the original Texas Chainsaw. First of all, I like to just say, after, because it's been a long time since I revisited these movies. The original is just, in my opinion, so much better than the remake, because like the remake was just trying to be like more redneck and just gritty and dirty, and it came off to me as like a forced thing, so it just didn't seem as grounded. Like, not that the first one was like super grounded, but you could really see like people like that existing. And the second one, it was just like the house was so, not the second one, the remake, the house was just so dirty and gritty in the basement, it just lost me on that immediately.
Well, and two, the first one, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when Tobe Hooper came out with this, and 74 is a relatively low budget film. They actually tried, their initial thoughts were they're gonna get a PG rating for it, because at the time it was just PG and then R and X, and they thought that they could get a PG rating because they kept a lot of the gore off screen or implied. They didn't have any nudity, and there wasn't really any cursing. And then they initially got an X-rated cut, and they had to go ahead and take some things out. But but the movie, you can see sometimes there are scenes, especially some of like the dinner scenes and stuff like that, where you can tell that like some of the more artful moments in them are probably just masking like their lack of budget to show certain things. But I think that's what makes it great, is like it feels artfully done, and it almost at times feels kind of like a documentary style film.
Yeah.
Like just in the way it's shot and the graininess of it. And
the cinematographer, he got hired because of his cinema verte style, and I think he had done some documentaries, which, interestingly enough, I don't know if you guys looked this up, it was the same cinematographer that worked on the original one, got hired to do the remake.
Yeah.
And he also did the cinematography for the new, or the remake of Friday the 13th, and Michael Bay found him, I guess, because he did a lot of music video, I Do Anything for Love. And watching that, that original film has a lot of like kind of zooms, like, dollies and zooms and everything. And watching this Meatloaf video and then the remake, you can see why Michael Bay is drawn to that style, because that's very much, the camera always has to be moving almost. But but still, I like the way the original one shot more than this remake, because there's a lot of moments that they're okay with like hanging on something for a while. The beginning of the original one, though, I feel like it's a little thrown together, and they said a lot of stuff was ad-libbed, and it feels a little bit unwieldy. Like they kind of, I don't feel like it was super focused, but once it hits that point where Leatherface comes in, it's just relentless, from there on out. Go ahead.
The one thing I hated about the remake is like everybody's so fucking sweaty in it, and it's like they're in the other movie, everybody's like really sweaty, and it just feels dirty from the get go. Like
Michael Bay likes to sweat.
Yeah, I know.
Sweat Megan Fox up and everything. So I'm sure he was like, everybody be glistening.
Yeah, I know, but it just feel like they're like, let's just try to make this as dirty as we can try to make it from the beginning to end. Just it looks like it's rolled in filth. And like I don't know, like the first one, like I know like the plot's kind of thin because like
the plot's very thin,
but at least in the original, it somewhat kind of covered the real events that the movie's actually based off of. Whereas like the remake was just like, fuck it, we're just gonna say this is based off of real events and not really, because like in the original one, like you saw furniture in the house made of people.
When you saw the beginning where they're desecrating the corpses at
and like that was actually pretty gross.
Yeah, and it was all just stories that Tobe Hooper had heard. Like that's what it was based on. I mean, they said it was based on Ed Reese's relatives had told him from Wisconsin and stuff, So it's not like it was like very specific. It was just something in his conscious and subconscious mind, I guess. But yeah, it's the way they started out. It's fine, the original, and you're kind of just waiting. The actors are pretty terrible, I think.
Yeah, they're not good.
They're awful. They're really bad in the beginning, but it kind of gets over that hump, and for the most part, once it starts and when Leatherface is chasing, like the sound design on this original film is so much better than the remake. The remake is just kind of a typical. You kind of forget about it and it just blends into the movie. And the original has all those great, kind of impactful sounds whenever they're in the room, that's dressed in all the bones and everything, when they flash shots of it and stuff. And then the chainsaw, when Leatherface is chasing, it's just this constant sound of the chainsaw. And it just kind of, it builds that tension and it stays there for a very long time. And it's just always there. And it feels as in it follows like it's always there behind her, whether she's far away from him or close to him. That chainsaw is always going when he's in pursuit. And the remake, they break from that. Like it's constant. It'll die or he'll shut it off. And like there's the moment where Jessica Biel is in that room and she hides her friend in the closet, in the one closet, and she gets in the other. And it's like, okay, they're just relying on these typical horror tropes. That's like a Michael Myers thing. Michael Myers stalks silently. And now it's like Leatherface turns off his chainsaw. He's looking around. Like in the original film, he was just this like ball of, energy and violence that just comes barreling at you the whole time.
Like, and that's what made him intimidating.
Yeah. And that's what kept that tension up in those original films. This one, it just kind of diluted it because they took so many pauses. This film, they added a ton of story. It was 20 minutes longer and it felt like it. And there was a lot of breaks, between the chasing and all that. So it's just, I feel like they diluted a lot of what worked with that original film.
Another thing too, that like the original film that was so great, which I think is probably one of the best scenes in any horror movie I've ever seen, is when the first guy goes in the house, kind of, and once they. For some reason, they decide that they hear like an engine running, so they're going to go borrow gas from them in the middle of Texas, in the middle of nowhere. It seems like a great idea. So they wander over the house and they knock on the door and he goes in and he sees like all the taxidermy animals on the wall. So he kind of walks over and investigates. He stumbles on the wood and he looks up, and then here you have Leatherface and he hits him and hit the mallet. Mm-hmm. And he drags him in. Just as he drags the body, he slams that door. Yeah, like that's one of the coolest scenes like in any horror movie I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Because it's creepy as fuck. And it's like, that is still like Just a creepy ass scene.
Yeah, and it's like you're just watching this happen, and it seems like very natural almost. And in the new film, like I said, they can't seem to want to hold on anything for too long. It's very Michael Bay, like, you know, it's a lot of cuts and everything. And they recreate that scene, but it's just so quick. It's just like a little thing, and they've got a tight shot of him closing the door, and it's not as like a holy shit moment at all. It's just like, oh, this just happened. This was like that scene in the original, you know, and it's
and like even going to like, you know, the infamous hook scene, because in the original that was like a controversial thing because he hooked the woman, you know, because after the girlfriend sits aside and waits for long enough, she decides she's gonna walk in and look for her boyfriend, and she walks in and finds the room with all the humans, you know, flesh skeleton chairs and stuff. And then, you know, Leatherface grabs her and takes her in the room while she's still flipping around and just hooks her on the hook. And which that was pretty fucked up, too, you know.
And two, like one thing that, I mean, I think it's different eras of filmmaking and, like I said, lower budget and things like that in the original film. But like when Leatherface, you know, makes his first kill, it's, you know, boom, boom, it's done. And, you know, that entire scene is, you know, 15 seconds from beginning to end. And it just happens later on when he's chasing Sally and her brother Franklin. And
he didn't get chased very long.
Yeah, he just, you know, he just cuts him. He cuts Franklin up pretty quickly. Like, it's just in the remake, they add tension to the scenes, or they try to add tension to the scenes and make them get drawn out. And make, you know, the Leatherface attacks take longer and be multi-steps with, like, you know, 40, 50 cuts. Towards the original, it just cuts straight to the chase, and, you know, he killed somebody quickly. And then there's, like, the one scene, like, where he's chasing Sally, like, outside at night, and it's literally just, like, he runs out, chases her around out in the dark, and they go back in the house.
They circle back around.
Yeah. But that's how something will probably really happen.
Hey, but second off, Sally's a fucking badass, dude. She jumps through 2 windows.
Yeah.
Like, just fucking barrels out of a 2-story window. Like, that's, like, a real thing to do. That's, like, if I was getting chased with somebody with a chainsaw, I would rather just take my chances jumping out the fucking window than with the chainsaw, you know?
Well, and going back to, is this a slasher? You know, one thing I think this film established, from what I've read, this was like kind of the first one that introduced the final girl.
Yeah, it was.
Trope, you know, so I think that's another reason why. And typically with slasher films too, I think in your mind, most of the time it's somebody being stalked. And, you know, normally it's in their own environment, or if they're, I guess, you know, Friday the 13th, they're in Jason's environment. So that is kind of a little bit like Texas Chainsaw, to be honest. Yeah. So, yeah, I think looking at it at the lens of Friday the 13th, I guess this does feel more like a slasher film. It's a little bit different. You know, they're kind of intruding on their territory, but it is a lot like Jason, where they have their spot and you go in there and you're going to get killed. Only this family eats you.
I want to say this, though. I think where this one was way more successful than the remake was, this was almost as much of a psychological like thing than it was like an actual physical, because like they tormented Sally toward the end, you know, because you're talking about where she gets chased through with Leatherface and she escapes and makes it back to, somehow ends up at the gas station they go to in the beginning of the movie. And he's like, oh, okay, well, I'll help you. And then he comes back and like beats her with the broomstick, knocks her out, ties her up. And then like while he's driving her back to the house, he's jabbing her with the stick and like kind of torturing her, you know? So it was like way more psychological and just torturous to her than it was like, cause in this movie, like you said, maybe some of it was the budget, like most of the kills were very, very fast and they're off screen. You know, because like the original killer, like when he hooks the girlfriend, he kind of starts cutting the guy with the chainsaw, but it doesn't really show exactly what he's doing.
Yeah, they were going for that PG rating.
Yeah. And another thing, too, I think is fucked up about the original is like it's heavily implied that the people that her friends that are killed, they cooked them into meat, you know, because like it's kind of implied that their dinner is the people of her friends that they killed earlier.
Yeah.
You know, which I think that's a little more.
This was earlier, there had been some other films that had dealt with cannibalism, but I think this is one of the earlier ones that kind of repopularized that. I think there was some like in the 30s and 40s and stuff like that, but this is another thing that, and I think that's another reason, you know, the kind of taboo element that
and
kind of shocked people a little bit at the time.
And once you realize what was going on, it makes it even more gross that the handicapped brother was eating meat at the beginning. Like the barbecue was people.
Yeah.
So that's kind of gross too. But if you notice, like the barbecue in the movie looked kind of weird, or it did to me anyway.
Well, and one thing that when you look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre 74 versus 2003, like I've mentioned this plenty of times before, I think like there are certain trends that you see in movies that I really hate. And the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, so there was really, in the killing and maiming of people, there were only a few people involved with it. There was the hitchhiker and Leatherface, who were brothers, and then their dad, who owned the gas station, and then their grandpa, that was like the creepiest part of the movie.
Yeah.
And which is odd that they omitted that from the remake. And it was just, Jim Sidow was the old man. So there was really three people actively involved in this conspiracy, like kill and murder people. Which, if the brothers are both as fucked up and the dad, lets them do it, and like that's understandable. In the remake, there's a ton of people involved in this. There's the sheriff, played by Arlie Ermy. Then there's the little boy. Then there's Arlie Ermy's mom, who is Leatherface's mom, and in this one, his motivation for being a killer is he has a skin condition and people make fun of him.
Which is what I was going back to earlier before, is like in the original, you didn't really know anything about Leatherface. You just knew he fucked people up with a chainsaw and made them into meat. Like, that's what he did. And they didn't give a description. But this one, it's like, he has a skin condition. So it's kind of like they almost.
Like, why?
Yeah.
Why?
And
who cares?
And kind of, to me, it almost reminds me of like Friday the 13th, because like Jason was angry because he was deformed and they let him drown. So it's kind of like the same thing. So it's like, to me, like it loses its impact a little bit of like it was being scary, because it's like, man, don't explain it. Just make it is what it is. And another thing too is just like, I liked in the original that he, like the Leatherface, it was kind of funny because he had 3 different masks in the movie. Mm-hmm. He had like the old woman mask. The first mask was just like, I guess like the people call it the kill mask. And then he had like an old woman mask at one point in the movie, and he's like making the house together. And then when they served dinner, he had like the made up face, whereas I had makeup on the mask.
Yeah.
And they kind of abandoned that theme.
He kind of played the role as the female, the mother of the house, or whatever.
Yeah, he really did. And I thought that was kind of like weird and it was just weird and interesting. And like the brother, the younger hitchhiker brother, was like the rebellious one,
And but just like I said, going back to the point that I was making, like they make it more of a conspiracy. Like the sheriff is in on this. Then there's like the larger lady and her daughter that have the stolen baby and they live in the trailer. So there's like more people involved and complicit in all this stuff. And I just like I don't really know of any true life cases of people being cannibals and condoning it in groups. Like 10 people in on this cannibal conspiracy or. Yeah. So whenever like new movies have the trend just to make stuff have more people involved and complicit in it, like that's a trend I think that's negative towards all these movies. And I would say that in the original, they pick up the hitchhiker, who's just kind of like this kind of batshit crazy guy that does this crazy shit, and they kick him out of the van. And then in the remake, they have the girl that kills herself.
Which was just for the blood.
And I think that, like, the original movie, like we said, like, the beginning of it's a little bit clunky. And, like we said, like, these actors weren't great actors or actresses at that point in their career. They were probably just there because they knew people, lived in the area, and, were willing to do it. The movie, the original, has some moments of levity. It has some, not necessarily super funny parts at the beginning when Franklin goes down the street or he rolls down the hill and falls out of his wheelchair.
Yeah.
So there are some moments of levity, and there are some interactions between the main characters and people at the graveyard who aren't, evil. So you have some moments of downtime before stuff really gets tense and, things go to hell. In the remake, it's like relentlessly bleak. It's, like Derek said, it's very grimy and dirty. And like from the beginning of the movie, there's zero laughs. unless you laughed at the, like I said, the increasingly poor decisions of Jessica Biel.
Well, that's really what they should name this movie, because it's like everything in the movie is her fault. They all die because of her, and she is terrible and awful, and it all happened because of her.
If she had just let them leave that girl's body at the mill and they left, the movie's
Or
over.
if she just decided to not fuck with her and just say, fuck this shit, this bitch is walking, we're leaving.
Yeah, if they had never
It
picked
never
picked up
happened.
But I think, it's just that, like I said, the original, there were some moments of levity, and they weren't trying to manipulate you into the cat and mouse. Like I said, the remake was just overly directed and shot on like the kills and stuff. Like when they're in the beginning of the movie, when like Leatherface, takes the first guy and they kind of recreate the classic scene from the first one. They run outside after a slight altercation in the house with like a tire iron, and so they're running outside and they're running through sheets, and they make it seem like these sheets weigh 100 pounds and you have to like carefully dodge around them as opposed to just running straight through them because they're sheets. But then, like, he slices his leg off and takes him inside. So the entire, everything seems overdone.
And another thing, too, is, like, to me, when you cut the guy's leg off, like, it's just so much. And, like, the hook scene, to me, wasn't as nearly as disturbing in the remake as it was in the original because, like, it was so grimy and dungy and dirty. It's just like, man. And I think, too, like, this movie even suffered from, like, I think they picked and choose the violent scenes a little too... Like, they spent all their extreme violence early on in the movie, so as it got later on, they couldn't show anything. Because, like, they had the girl shoot herself, and then you had the leg getting cut off. So that was, like, their big violence in the movie, the big gore scenes. So you got left with not much gore to be... There wasn't much else you could do from that point on,
One thing I did like... Well, this is, like, one little scene. The grandpa in the wheelchair... I did like the moment whenever, he's arguing with Jessica Biel's boyfriend. Was that her boyfriend? No, it wasn't her boyfriend at that point. It was the dude that help rescue the other guy.
Yeah.
Is whenever the grandpa's like stomping on the floor, like calling Leatherface up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a cool.
Scene. That was a cool thing. Like that's their, almost like that's their signal or whatever. Like that was kind of a cool thing. That was a cool moment from the remake.
Yeah,
and I like Arlie Ermy for the most part.
Yeah,
I just like him as an actor.
Yeah.
And he played not like he played far from his typical role. and there was some good moments, like when he gets the gun, he puts it up. Holster.
Yeah.
Like there was some good moments in the movie, but yeah, it's just so much missed the mark. But to be honest, like. The original film, I think we can all look at it and appreciate it for what it is and for when it was made. And we can make a lot of concessions saying, well, we give it a whole lot of passes. But, if you put down these two movies in front of 15-year-old kids, like, I think they're going to be less bored with the remake.
Oh, yeah.
Only because of the way it looks. The other one, it was rough. It was shot on 16 millimeter. It kind of like drifts along. If you can get them to that halfway point in the movie, I think they'll go along and they'll really enjoy it. The grandpa they'll probably laugh at, but some of that was supposed to be funny, especially Leatherface and the makeup. And I think that's what was good about it. Like you said, there's no real humor. There's not a lot. Arlie Ermy does have some humor in this film, at least. But yeah, it's kind of a vapid almost. But it's the original movie. You have to make a lot of concessions now to kind of give that a pass, which a lot of people who have seen it originally and are into horror do. We totally give all that stuff a pass because you can kind of see past it and see what's great about that movie. Yeah, which this movie doesn't have that it factor.
No, and I think you're right. But, like I said, this is kind of going back to like what I was talking about Halloween last week. And I think you're completely right. If you put these two movies in modern audiences, most of the time the pacing of the original is going to be a little boring. And there's really not any gore in it at whatsoever. You think about it, there's very minimal, gore. And I think it'd be hard pressed to get modern audiences to be impressed with the original. Whereas the remake, like I said, I feel like they use most of the gore in two scenes, but that happens enough. that you will be able to get through it. You know, because like one of the worst scenes in any horror movie I've ever seen in my entire life is the scene toward the end where they're like in the cabin in the woods and she puts her friend in the closet and she's hiding from Leatherface. And Leatherface like finds her and kind of breaks their wall like a professional wrestler and starts dragging her around the room. And the friend comes out and then kind of attacks Leatherface and he drops like the chainsaw because he's about to cut her up or something. Mm-hmm. So here the fucking chainsaw's flopping around the floor, you know, running. And Leatherface grabs her friend. And so Jessica Biel's just like, you get off of him. Don't you touch my friend. You know, and it's like she's slapping him. He's like, bitch, grab the chainsaw.
And then
she jumps over the fucking chainsaw and runs out of the room. And then
her friend gets one of the worst kills in the movie when he gets cut up from the groin up.
Yeah. And it's like you jumped over the chainsaw and you ran out of the room. And Leatherface was preoccupied. And that was like the stupidest scene I've ever seen in a horror movie. I mean, I remember I was like 13. I thought it was stupid. Yeah. You know, like it just stuck with me.
When I saw this movie in theaters in high school on like a weekend as a teenager, I didn't mind it. I thought, oh, that was all right. It was fine. You know, but I saw it in theater with a group of people. And it had been a long time since I'd seen the original. I'd probably seen the original when I was maybe like in 7th grade. That was probably the last time I'd watched it. So I thought it was fine, but I never cared about watching it again. And watching this time, I was just waiting for it to be over. Like it was a chore to get through.
It really was, because there's like no staying power on it, you know?
And two, like, you know, like a lot of horror movies live or die by the third act. Like a lot of current horror movies, people are like, oh, I love the first 2/3, but the third act just lost me. So I think the third act is one of the most important parts of a horror film. And in the original, I thought that, you know, the last thirds was very good. And then, like, the very end was just, like, batshit insane. Like, she runs out, the trucker's, like, hits the hitchhiker, stops, Leatherface comes up and attacks the truck, and then the driver's like, nope, fuck this. Takes off running, like, throws the wrench at him.
Yeah, smacks in the face with the wrench, and then he just takes off.
The other truck drives by. So you have, like, all this shit happening. It's crazy, and, like, you know, she jumps in the backseat.
Yeah.
And then in the remake,
they blew their load when they cut the guy's leg off, and after that point, there was zero tension almost in the rest of the movie.
Like the meat packing plant, and then she,
which calls back to, you know, the original films, you know, anti-meat eating, replacing the humans for animals and stuff.
Yeah, but
then, so they try to do something there.
But then she, like, goes to the gas station and, like, steals the car and runs over the sheriff and steals the baby. And once again, it's just overdone and like, too much going on.
The only thing I can say for running over the sheriff, you know, the one thing kind of interesting about that is through this whole film, like, she's been the person that's, you know, like, oh, we need to try to help this hitchhiker and do this and do that. And she's always, like, you know, giving concessions and stuff and trying to help people out. And, like, she doesn't want to leave her boyfriend, which is the right thing to do in that situation. Like, at that point, okay, yeah, that's the right thing to do. But at least it had that moment that a lot of horror films have where you're kind of like, okay, great, because it's her doing something horrible, but it feels totally justified, that kill or be killed moment, when she realizes, I've got to, you know, hit Arlie Ermy with this car, and then she continues to back over him. Like, it's one of those things where she's been put through so much that she's like, fuck it, you know, I'm going to kill this guy.
But, like, the bad thing is, like, that's in real life, if you did this to somebody, that'd be extremely bloody and gory.
Yeah.
In that movie, it's like...
And it's cruel, too.
Yeah. But, like, in that movie, it's just kind of like, you know, his body's perfectly intact, and he's just been, you know...
I don't know.
There was, like, no zero... But I say, like, I think they used all their gore budget, or the allowable amount, like, for the girl shooting herself and the leg getting cut off. So the rest of the movie was just kind of dry, you know? Because even when the guy got cut up through the groin, there was no blood, you know?
Well, and it's just, like, you know... Like I said, the original one was content for it to end by the girl, you know, just running out into the street and then, like, coincidentally being there, you know, like a semi stopped and like a truck stopped. And then, like, one of the most iconic scenes of, you know, horror movies is when she's in the back of that truck, like Leatherface running, swinging the chainsaw around. Like, that's one of the most remembered scenes in horror. You know, it's right up there with, you know, like stuff from Halloween and, you know, Michael Myers and Jason, stuff like that. And then in this one, there was no iconic scene. The ending, like I said, had to tap back into the prior story, and she had to save the baby. And then we didn't even mention the kid that helps her escape.
Like the feral kid from Mad Max.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I'm glad you said that though, because the ending in the original was Mad Max-ish because one of the villains got ran over by a semi truck.
Yeah. Talking about the ending of the original being so powerful and it was just so frantic and high paced. Like the great thing about it is the way the kind of the carnage starts in that first one, where Leatherface just pops out, and it starts like quickly, like almost out of nowhere. It's like boom, it starts. It almost ends like it starts. Like it's just so frantic, and then boom, it's over, and it's done. So it keeps that tension going up until the final moments of the film, and there's no like extra ending or what I mean, kind of scene where she's telling police and then they're showing police back at the scene. Actually, what this one does, which they had an interesting take on the wraparound video story, but still, it kind of pulls you out of it a little bit.
And two, I think I mentioned this before on one of our prior podcasts, but when I saw this in theaters, I do remember people in the theater who thought that the footage, the beginning and end segments were like real.
Oh my!
And who mentioned like who were talking as if like, yeah, man, when that Texas Chainsaw Massacre happened in real life, and like acting like it really happens. Like no. It was loosely based on like Ed Gein and other, like you say, like other things that Tobe Hooper had heard. And Ed Gein was in Wisconsin, so not Texas. He mostly started digging up dead bodies and then eventually killed a couple of women by shooting them.
But so I think it's safe to assume that we think very little of the remake, correct?
It is very disposable.
Yeah.
Because at least with, I'm trying to think, like there have been some effective horror remakes, but I think in order for a horror remake to work, it needs to be a movie that's known but not loved, that's a good concept but flawed, and then, John Carpenter's The Thing was a movie where the original was liked. It wasn't like revered as the end-all be-all for that, story, and then he came in and made a version that was, one of the best movies that I've ever seen.
Yeah, and there's so much gold to mine. Like our film, Corey's been, he's kind of, his niche is those hard to find movies that aren't even on home video or whatever. And he showed me a lot of these over time, and there's so much gold to mine there because they are really rough films. They're some of the concepts aren't executed very well or are just done well at all. But there's something there in those movies to love. And
well, they had heart,
and that and that's where I hope the next step of remakes come, because remakes aren't going to stop. But if they're going to do it, let's start doing some that have these great ideals that missed the mark the first time around, that didn't become huge, not because they just weren't found, because they weren't, great films.
Well, even out of Tobe Hooper's filmography, like a movie that I think would be a better target for a remake would be Funhouse or the Funhouse.
Yeah, because that's one of the movies like we kind of meet the quote of like it's not a well-loved movie. Like it's and there's not like a definable character. You don't have a Leatherface in it, So it's something that you could remake, and you wouldn't have a huge expectation on it based on the past movie,
It's like find a good story, and then you can, instead of leaning on that it's a franchise and that's where you're going to pull, you can kind of have a little name that's already somewhat established and maybe in the back of some people's minds. But, if you're going to have a good story, hopefully you'll get some traction that way. But, the thing that's important is not the critical reception of these films, really, like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. I'm just looking at Wikipedia real quick. Budget was $9.5 million. It made $107 million. It made 10 times. I don't, that doesn't factor in the marketing budget, but over 11 times of his budget almost. And then Friday the 13th, $19 million budget, made $91 million. So it's, and it's the name that pulls those in. I went to see that in high school. And it's not like Texas Chainsaw was my favorite horror genre at the time. I saw it, like I said, I'd watched it, but it had been a long time. But it was one of those things like, oh, they're remaking the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. yeah, that sounds like an awesome Saturday night, you know?
And it's just like these, and two, I think the remake, like it was like the first big movie that Jessica Biel had done after she had been on Seventh Heaven for a while.
Yeah.
So
And like we said, one of the first big horror remakes of that era.
in the movie, I think the marketing for it heavily relied on her impressive physique and the fact that she wore a lot of wet shirts that were tied up, bearing her midriff. So you have, I mean, I think these movies, and the thing that sometimes kind of breaks my heart on some of these movies, they make these remakes, and then people, like younger kids, like we said, because a lot of times horror kind of lives and dies on the, like the high schoolers, go and watch these movies having never seen the original, and then, you know, act like that is the only version of the story that exists are the remakes. And then if they ever see the original, like, man, that shit's weak.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, though, it's just a generational thing because it's like the original honestly takes a little more patience to watch. And I think that the original is the third act, like you said, is way better in the original than in the remake. Because the remake, like I said, I think they pretty much use all their gags or tricks in the first half. And then the only really gore in the last part of the movie is when she cuts off Leatherface's arm with a hatchet. You know?
And I just think that, you know, the original movie,
Or actually it was a meat cleaver.
like the remake is more of a chase movie, like where she is on the run being pursued for, you know, a lot of it, as opposed to the original really wasn't that, like it had a little bit of pursuit to it, but you know, they had like the scene, like the dinner scene where they cut her hand and make her, or they let the grandpa drink the blood, just like really
and then,
creepy
then
shit.
And it got rid of everything that didn't matter. I mean, it didn't have any of the extra stuff, but this film had so much stuff that didn't matter, and that original had those scenes like that makes them more impactful.
And one of the most bizarre scenes in horror movies I remember, I even forgot about this, is when they decide they want the grandpa to kill her, Sally, in the original. Yeah. So here this extremely feeble old man that looks mummified, and there's almost no way he could be alive. And they're like, here you got Leatherface like trying to hold the hammer in his hand and hit the girl in the head. And it does not work, but they keep trying, and it's just so bizarre that it worked.
Well, then like one or two times he kind of drops the hammer and it hits her head. So like you can see like she has like blood on her head and stuff.
Yeah.
They said they really got hurt on the set of that film too. A lot of them came away pretty damaged physically. But one thing I liked about that scene too, when it was showing the family, like there was no females in it, and I think they said that was not super intentional. Like somebody brought it up to Toby Hooper, and he was kind of like, "Oh yeah, I guess there isn't." But for me, it built up like, what happened to the females? Is it kind of like breeding and then killing these women and eating them? You know what I mean? And like surviving without them, and it's just kind of this
unexplained.
This you know, I don't know. I can't find the right word, but kind of just like a masculine, like you know, a men's only club deal of this like animalistic urges that men have, and it's like eating and killing and everything like that. But apparently that wasn't super intentional. But yeah, they bring in the whole family, like the entire family, in the remake, and it just kind of it starts adding too much. Like, okay, well this person's this. Okay, well this is a whole family here, and then they've got the baby that they took the baby. Well, now she's going to save the baby.
It was overstuffed.
I think it just makes it feel less creepy because it's like such a large net of people in it that it's just like it'd be so much easier for them to do it. Whereas it's and one thing too in the original they never really talked about was, if you remember when they first stop at the gas station, there's a guy that walks over and washes the windshield who seemed a little slow. What happened to him? Like he was never in the movie at all after that point. And I feel like, judging by just a little bit of the character you saw what he was, like he wasn't mentally capable of going in and having his own place, and nobody else took care of him, so maybe that's just something they had in the movie and it's never revisited. But I kind of figured he would play a part in it somehow, and he didn't.
Well, too, like the hitchhiker seemed kind of touched, and the guy that played Leatherface, Gunnar Hansen, said that he had based some of his character's mannerisms on like special needs children that he had watched.
Yeah, I read something about that. He went on that campus and people couldn't tell.
Yeah, and
wasn't he like walking around and people couldn't tell if he was special needs or not?
One other thing too, though, I liked about Leatherface's character as opposed to like the Michael Myers and your Jason is like he was just fat. he was like, while he was a big guy, he was just a big fat guy, you know. Whereas like your Michael Myers and your Jasons later on, like their interpretations are these huge muscular wrestling type guys. You know, it's like you could outrun Leatherface.
But he was pretty fast.
No, he was fast, but I'm saying, but you like, you know, you could kind of outrun him and, you know, for a while. But, you know, throughout the course of the movie, Sally's character got so damaged from just being attacked and assaulted and jumping out of windows that she just couldn't get away. You know, or she could, it was just very limited. Because remember, even at the end, when she, after like the grandpa unsuccessfully kept hitting her with the hammer, she jumped out the window again. And then she ran out toward the street, and the younger brother, the hitchhiker, was like kind of just taunting her, you know? And then if he had just killed her, they would have never got out in the street, and all that wouldn't have happened. But
So I think we can kind of go and wrap up with any final thoughts. I mean, I just think that, you know, when you talk about, you know, the movies that kind of set the stage for the existence of, you know, or the explosion of the horror genre, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre has to be pretty high up the list because it was one of the biggest hits at the time it came out. Like I said, it was then later surpassed by Halloween, but it still had a profound impact on, you know, the horror genre. And there are plenty of movies today that kind of just straight up rip this movie off and have taken a lot of elements from it. The remake, like I think it's overstuffed, but not of consequence. Like it's got a lot of stuff going on, but not a lot of it really matters. Mm-hmm. And like when I saw this in theaters, I didn't remember hating it. I just thought like Jessica Biel's character had a lot of frustrating decisions, and I don't know. It just felt like it was unnecessary. A lot of the stuff that happened in it. Like I said, they had the bigger family. She had to save the baby. And they just, you know, it made a lot of money for them, and it kind of set off the remake frenzy that would occur in the years to come. I mean, it's not like a terrible, terrible movie. It's just, I saw it in theaters in 2003, and actually the version that I watched for this, like I didn't own it, and I didn't really feel like buying it. I found a version on YouTube that was sped up to like 110% speed.
yeah, it's the same one.
So that it doesn't get caught by the content ID system. And you know what? Watching that movie sped up where it trims, you know, like 10 minutes off the runtime, that's actually the way to watch it.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
that
still,
was a little hard
but
for you to watch that.
I'll say this, even though it was like, because I watched the same exact one you did, it still felt too long. You know?
And it was only really noticeable at the beginning that like it was running at a little bit higher speed than normal. And once you watched it for a while, you kind of got in the swing of it. And
When you heard Sweet Home Alabama played it,
well, yeah.
Yeah, that
Sweet
was
Home
yeah.
Alabama. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do.
and I was like, wait, something's not right. I ended up renting another version of it because I was like, all right, can't
Yeah,
stand
that kind of fucks with you a little bit, you know?
Yeah, so
one thing, I don't know. Have you guys heard of All American Massacre, the prequel? Toby Hooper's son was trying to direct this. I think it was shot on video.
yeah.
But anyway, it was going to be a 60-minute featurette, but that's something that has not happened, I don't think. And Buckethead was doing the score for it. But if anybody hears any info on that, let us know, because I'd be very interested to see where that's at. They've tried to fund it to get it finished, and I don't know what's going on with it right now.
Yeah, so this is like, you know, like the Texas Chainsaw movies, like the first one I like a lot. The second one I need to rewatch. I haven't watched in a long time. The one with Dennis Hopper.
Yeah.
But like most people, you know, think that, you know, like over time it aged better and it's worth watching. But a lot of the rest of the series is kind of, to me, disposable and not really worth the time. But I guess we can go on to Sean for any of your feelings on this.
Yeah, I mean, again, I liked it fine enough when it came out. It was fine Saturday Night Movie. It wasn't, you know, it didn't like charge me up to like buy it when it came out or track it down to rewatch it again ever. And I was almost kind of like, watching it again. But I was like, my expectations were a little bit high because I remember thinking it was fine when it came out. But that remake just feels like a chore to sit through and watch. And again, the thing that's disappointing, that original film, the sound design was so good too. And that's what really sold it. And that's what's, you know, makes a lot of horror films great, is either the soundtrack or, you know, the sound design. And that's what builds that tension and kind of gives it a personality. And this new film, it's just very generic. And it's a shame they try to get the same cinematographer. And there's a couple moments, but the editing is really he's kind of a little bit more amped up now. Probably working with Michael Bay some on the Meatloaf video and a few other things, I think. But it's just, they're in a hurry to get somewhere. But if they didn't have so much crap packed in there, they could maybe take their time a little bit more, and it could have been more satisfying. And the original, like I said, objectively speaking, it's pretty rough, but it's got that it factor there, and it's kind of hard to deny like how powerful that last half of that movie is, even today. And on to you now, Derek.
Yeah, I just, like William was saying earlier, the third act is where you can tell if a movie's really good or not. And just all the stuff that Sally was put through at the end of the original was just terrifying. It's just like you think about that to me, like being tied down to a chair and being forced to eat food or that may or may not be your friends while you have a mummified man sucking blood out of your finger and you have a guy wearing somebody else's face. Like that would just screw you up, and be a little terrifying to have to deal with. Whereas I feel like, getting chased around wearing a white shirt in a factory with the sprinkler system on just doesn't seem as scary. I was never really impressed with the remake, and I feel like a lot of the stuff that they did in it just was like, it's fine for the time, but it's just like you said, it's just a chore to watch. Like if I was going to rewatch it again, like I just don't think I can make it through it, because there's that movie. Like I said, it just felt like to me they had like 3 parts of gore in the movie, and that was like most of the gore they could do, and then the rest of it they cut out because like her friend got cut up with a chainsaw. They didn't show any of that, and then or the girl that got cut up with the chainsaw, like her death was mostly off screen. And then the friend that got cut in the groin, that was they didn't show anything from that. So, but the gore they did show, I just felt like they showed it early and not very often. So I just think it just didn't have anything going for it. Whereas the original had the psychological torment and the physical torment on Sally's part, and just some iconic scenes. Like the first time you see Leatherface when he slams that door, that's just like, it was just a really good, awesome horror scene, and the recreation of it just fell very short, just like the rest of the movie did.
Yep, so I think that wraps up our discussion of the Texas Chain Saw Massacre. As always, if you're subscribed to us in iTunes, you can always go leave a review on the podcast if you like what we're doing. You can give us 5 stars. That would be super, super great. You can also find all the stuff we're doing on housebythevideostore.com. And there we have also links to all our social media profiles. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/HBTVS. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Vine at HBTVS_official. You can, as always, find all of our videos on YouTube. You can go to youtube.com/housebythevideostore or search for us.
And we also have like a tip jar on YouTube, which hasn't been used. But if you like our video content or anything else, you want to support the site, we're talking to somebody that works on all the back end stuff, and he's saying we need some more server costs soon. So we're getting some traffic, which is good, but now it's going to end up costing us more money.
Yeah, so... or if you're watching our videos on YouTube, you can, click on any of the ads that are in there, and that'll sling us some of the ad money. But as always, you can find all of our content on the website, find all the stuff we're putting out. If you want to find what we're doing on the internet specifically, you can find me on Twitter at Will_droid.
And I'm at BlevinsSean, BLEVINSSEAN on Twitter. And Derek uses Instagram, but my Instagram's at Sean2D2.
Yeah, my Instagram is at MetaWorldDerek. That's where I do most of my stuff.
And that's where you can find us on the internet. So that wraps up this podcast. We'll have a new one out next week.
And let us know if you like this versus thing with the original versus remake, because we're kind of trying something different. We don't always want to keep doing the same thing over and over, but if you like this, give us some feedback, and maybe we can, I'm sure we'll be doing some more regardless, but you can give us some suggestions on which ones to do, or any podcast topics you might want to hear us talk about, even if it's movie specific or just generally talking about horror tropes in general, like as we discussed the slasher films earlier in the podcast.
Yep. So, as always, thanks for listening.
House by the